So let's talk about some of the emotional patterns and core belief patterns that are associated with individuals subconsciously that tend to create some of these poor boundaries from the belief part and the emotional feedback we get when we have poor boundaries from the emotional component part. Okay? So your emotions, number one, are like your personal guidance system. They're letting you know when anything is out of alignment. And it can be in your internal reality, like the stories or narratives you're telling around an experience, the way you're perceiving things that can be painful. Or it can be the unmet needs or boundary violations that are taking place. So your emotions are like your best friends. They are there to serve you all the time. And it's when we can build a relationship to them that's having them as feedback instead of having them as like these things that just cause pain unnecessarily. When we can change how we perceive our emotional responses and realize that they literally are feedback to help us, that's when we become empowered to use our emotions for growth, expansion, connection, empowerment, instead of being used by our emotions that can create just unnecessary suffering. So the main emotions I see associated with people who struggle with poor boundaries are feeling pressured. Okay, obviously if you're feeling pressured, there's pressure in your life that you feel like you're not having boundaries around. Feeling stressed easily, feeling overwhelmed is a really good one, right? Like not being able to put boundaries up in different areas to not overwhelm yourself. Feeling fatigued all the time, feeling frustrated, feeling resentful tends to be a huge one. Feeling numb, depleted, or anxious. Anxiety is a huge feedback mechanism that has to do with our boundaries. Individuals who struggle with anxiety, usually at least a third of what's creating their anxiety is the lack of boundaries that they experience in their lives because they haven't been taught how to set boundaries, how to navigate interpersonal relationships or working relationships in a way that has healthy boundaries to make them feel safe in their day-to-day environment. So I want you to take a moment. I want you to go look in your workbook and fill in these blanks. I feel, and then insert the emotion, when, and insert the experience that tends to be happening. And you can check in which of the 7 areas of my life does this tend to take place. And ask yourself, what are my boundaries like in this area naturally? So let's say, for example, you're going, I feel resentful when my partner doesn't help out around the house. Okay? So what is that telling you? What are your boundaries like with your partner in terms of the household duties? Have you ever had a conscious conversation about expectations in this area? Do you have a quicker need to get things done and your partner doesn't really mind as much if the dishes are left laying around? And so you just always take it on without communicating or without setting up a habit or some kind of tool or strategy that creates resolution in this area. And just doing this exercise will bring you so many pieces of self-awareness around your boundaries. So go through this and look in the 7 areas of life and ask yourself, okay, when do I feel pressured in career? When do I feel pressured in my financial area of my life? Are you having all your friends and family members relying on you financially? Are you always lending money? Take a look. I feel resentful in my relationship. Okay, why? These are important pieces of feedback for you. The ideal relationship, honestly, has its resentment tank on empty. And that's a rule that I really encourage people to live by in their close interpersonal relationships, is have your resentment tank totally on empty because you talk about things, you're tuned into yourself, you set boundaries, you create conscious expectations. When things don't go as planned, you talk it through, you pivot, you adapt so that your needs are getting met and the other person's needs are getting met, and we're having healthy compromises in all of our interpersonal relationships. And if we're not tuned in to ourselves and what we feel and what we need, and we don't have a safe space of communication where we are authentically showing up and we allow others to authentically show up and we try to hear them fully through as well, then there isn't a space to create compromises and there isn't a space that we've created for boundaries. And so it is so important to do this work. Let's talk about the core beliefs associated with poor boundaries. So do you remember in the earliest part of this course, we were discussing the different core beliefs that we can have with that are sort of conditioned into us that create this lack of boundary setting? Well, something that's really important is we kind of have to tackle these beliefs first. So far, you should understand your boundaries, what they are, why we lost touch with our boundaries, what created the dynamics that we got out of touch with ourselves in the first place, and some of those sort of mini traumas that took place. then you should understand a little bit about what boundaries and boundary violations are, the different types of boundaries, the boundaries that you have in the 7 areas of your life. And now I want you to understand what's blocking you at an emotional level from setting these things in real time. Because what we want to do next year is we want to work to reprogram those pieces of messaging we had about setting boundaries and target those things. So we peel back the first layer. So then when we go into like the meat of what comes next, which is like identifying your boundaries in real time, how to communicate them, how to express them, and some exposure response tools, you're not going to know all those things but not be able to use them because you're too busy being blocked by your own fears and core beliefs. So let's say, for example, that you now understand boundaries, you can see your boundaries in the 7 areas of life, but you have this petrifying belief that says, if I set boundaries, I will be abandoned, I'll be alone, and I'll be unsafe. It doesn't matter at that point, like, how many great tools you have. You're going to struggle to set those boundaries specifically because you are not feeling safe to do so, right? And you're going to have emotional blocks, and your brain is more wired to avoid pain than to seek pleasure. So even if you feel like, oh, this could be great to set boundaries, you're going to let the fear probably rule you instead. So we have to find out, and I want you to take the time to go through this exercise with me here as well, and feel free to pause this if you need to. I want you to find out what your specific core beliefs or fears are associated with setting boundaries in the first place, okay? So here we have, and these are the most common ones. Feel free to add any extra ones that show up for you here. So core beliefs: I will be abandoned if I set boundaries. I will be all alone if I set boundaries. All my relationships, will sort of dissipate. I'll be left alone. I am not enough to set boundaries, okay? I'm undeserving to set boundaries. Okay, so undeserving would be like I inherently don't deserve. I'm not enough would be like I haven't earned my boundaries type of thing. I am not worthy of having boundaries. Okay, again, this is more like inherent self-worth. I as a human being shouldn't have boundaries. I am unsafe if I set boundaries. I am a burden to others if I have boundaries, needs, or desires. Okay, so again, maybe you had that like single parent who was always stressed and overwhelmed themselves, and so when you had a need, you got the messaging like, you're a burden, like, Tommy, can't you see how busy I am and how stressed I am? How could you possibly ask me to buy you a toy, right? These types of things. This is where we can get some of those painful pieces of messaging. You are bad or selfish if you have boundaries. Something is wrong with you if you have boundaries, okay? So like if you're taught in your family dynamic, for example, that, everybody knows that this is the way, we all sacrifice for each other. If that's what you're taught, and then you try to set a boundary, you might have been taught, the messaging you received, the conditioning you got as a result is like, something's wrong with you. Like you're defective for even thinking outside of the family dynamic. That's so horribly wrong and incorrect and out of alignment with what we do as a family. And so you might really personalize and think that you're, sort of this defective human being if you set a boundary. So get clear, like what's showing up for you so far. The last couple are boundaries equals conflict. This is a really common one, quite honestly. I will be punished or attacked if I set a boundary. I will be disliked, excluded, or exiled if I set a boundary. So these are the most common beliefs and fears I see associated with having poor boundaries. What shows up for you the strongest or the most frequently? And give these things a 1 to 10 rating. So maybe like, I am not enough to have boundaries shows up a 9 out of 10. Write that down. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go into a little bit of reprogramming of these fears and boundaries as it relates specifically to beliefs. And what I'm going to ask you to do is sort of insert these beliefs into the next exercises here, okay? So pause if you need to. Take the time to rate those core beliefs as you have them. And when you're ready, I'm going to just dive in here to some of the reprogramming for those core beliefs around boundaries specifically. So what is reprogramming? For those of you who aren't already familiar, reprogramming is essentially the act of using repetition plus emotion to create new neural pathways or new neural circuits and reinforce them, so fire and wire them over and over again until they strengthen enough over time and we keep giving them energy and attention, and then it leaves space for the old neural pathways that we no longer need to sort of atrophy over time instead. So we create not only new subconscious programs, but we actually change the neuroplasticity of our brain by doing this, okay? It's a term called neurogenesis, okay? So when we're reprogramming core beliefs, here's what I want you to do as it relates to boundaries. Number one, pick out one core belief a day that resonates with you most on the pain point level. So I am bad if I set boundaries. If that was a 10 and that was your highest, pick that one first. If you have multiple ones that are 10, just go pick whichever ones you feel inspired to work on first and break through those high ones day to day first, okay? So pick the core belief, pick a boundary that you would like to set each evening, okay? So each evening, pick a boundary, look from what you've done before in terms of plucking out those boundaries in each of the 7 areas of your life. And what I want you to do is find 5 counteracting pieces of evidence for each belief each day. So you can pick a new belief each different day, but feel free to come back and recycle through them. And I want you to pick 5 pieces of counteracting evidence for why it's actually good to set boundaries. I'm going to give you some examples. Let's say it's a Friday, and Friday you're like, you know what? I want to set a boundary around something in my friendships. And then maybe the belief that's triggered is like, I will be alone, okay? What you're going to do on Friday evening is you're going to pick 5 pieces of evidence for why you won't be alone by setting this boundary. So you might come up with things like, well, a boundary is a joining, it's not a separation. This will help me express myself more honestly so I can be seen and heard with this person better, and that will actually strengthen my friendships. This will also help me to hold space for that person to express themselves more honestly, and I want them to be more authentic with me as well. And so if we both show up more vulnerably and truthfully, it can only strengthen our friendship, and there's less likely of a chance of me being alone. So see how we pulled out a few different pieces of proof there? Boundaries are joining, it's not a separation. I'll connect more honestly, I'll be seen and heard, that person can be seen and heard too. We'll both connect together more deeply, and that will strengthen our relationship. So pick a bunch of pieces of proof that counteract that original idea. And what I want you to do is recycle through this as many times as possible. So pick a new belief the next day. Your brain does like novelty, but it needs the repetition still, so come back. Feel free to return to that I will be alone belief with a new boundary, okay, at a different point in time. So maybe Saturday you pick, I am bad for having a boundary. And you have 5 pieces of proof for why you're not bad for having a boundary. And Sunday, maybe you pick, I am unsafe if I have boundaries because I'll be attacked. And then look at different places where you've set a boundary and you've been safe, or people you know who do set boundaries and they're actually safer, and how boundaries actually create long-term safety. And so you're trying to reprogram your brain and fire and wire new perceptions and new neural circuits into perceiving your relationship to boundaries differently over time. And this is extremely effective if you're consistent with this for about 21 days. And we're going to couple this type of core belief reprogramming with exposure response reprogramming later in this course, which is actually the single most effective type of reprogramming for setting boundaries specifically. But this is a really important place to start because it helps us peel back that first layer of fear, so then we can actually do the underlying work through the actions that are required in our exposure response reprogramming activities. So remember, think of a new boundary each day, find the core wound that comes with it, and then find 5 counteracting pieces of evidence for each of those core wounds, okay? Use the repetition plus emotion. This is literally what creates the reprogramming. It's what's reinforcing those neural circuits. So in the next module, we're going to dive into the actual process of setting boundaries, called the boundary identification process. Then we're going to go into the boundary communication process and the boundary negotiation process.